One, let's do this. So I've put these slides together. I think some of you hopefully have got the message on the group that I was going to be a few minutes late. Let's get through this. As I said on the voice message earlier, I'm going to go through some of the stuff fairly quickly and try and address as much as possible. So you'll have a lot more slides than what I'm going to be talking to. So if we look at these very quickly, let me just make sure that I stop the transcription here and let's go through it. So this is the first submission for RPBS. I'm not sure how these two relate to each other. What I understand is that RPBS is about your submission in terms of your doing your research during the year. But for each submission, I will be doing this kind of thing. We'll have specific slides that relate to the submission, and then also we'll spend a bit of time going through the detail. So you'll see that the slides should perfectly match. Okay, come on. Okay, so this is going to replay and replay. Right, so you'll remember that I'd shared this slide previously. This to me is important, and I would have at this point already printed this out. I think the key thing is that one of the terms that I'm going to knock into your heads is the idea of the golden thread. So if you've adopted an interpretivist paradigm, then you will have qualitative research. And you'll see there are certain things that essentially relate to qualitative research. And you can have a glance at these. If you've adopted a positivist paradigm, you will have quantitative research. We're not going to allow critical realism at this level, so there won't be a mixed methods option available to you. Right, let's look at part A. Let's look at part A. So it starts with your title. I think there are a couple of guidelines in terms of titles. The first one is you want a title that really grabs someone's attention. So you'll see that when I write titles, I write explore, explain, and describe. Explore, generally, I relate to the idea of exploratory research, and that would be for the qualitative researchers. Explain and describe would be the relationship thing in terms of quantitative research. Things that have to be done in terms of the title, it has to tell us the subject and the scope of our study. No abbreviations, and remember, always a positive impression. Don't create a negative impression, and then look at the language from your field of study. Every specific subject has its own sort of lingo, and try and stick to that lingo. I don't like the idea of saying a study of. We know that it's a study. That's why for my students in my supervision group, we'll talk exploring, describing, and explaining, and we normally have it in the form of a phrase. I'm not a big fan of it in the form of a question. Right, so from there, we look at the problem statement. So I like the idea of writing a problem statement based around these three broad areas. Now, you will never write part A, part B, or part C. I think that is implied. But for me, when I write a problem statement, I like the idea of suggesting what the ideal would be. So, what this problem would look like once we've effectively dealt with it. In terms of part B, that is the deficiency, that is the shortfall, that is the problem. And I did say that, say this previously. Please make sure that you write your part B, the reality, as a problem to be solved, as a headache. So initially, you'll see in terms of the concept document, you don't have to go overboard in having too many references here. But once we start working towards the full documents, you will have quite a bit of detail where you support the deficiency with specific research. And then part C is what we intend to do to move the gap or to reduce the gap between part B and part A. So here I would normally say I will adopt a qualitative approach whereby I approach a range of subject matter experts using interviews to try and deal with the issue as discussed in the previous part. So for me, that is the ideal way of writing a specific problem statement. If you do not do part A and C, please make sure that part B is really accurate. We need to be able to see what the headache is, what the deficiency is, what the shortfall is. Right. In terms of the purpose statement. So from the problem statement, we go to the purpose statement. You'll see that I've given a couple of scripts here. For me, I like the idea of doing this. If you start with that, the purpose of this paper is to, you cannot end up in the wrong place. So again, the purpose of this paper is to research whatever the issue is. Okay, but very, very clear that if you follow any of these scripts, you will end up in the right place. My reason for writing this, the paper will discuss, and then twofold if you're going to do that kind of research. I like the first one. The purpose of this paper is to, okay, what do you want to achieve in this particular paper? I've given some more scripts, and a lot of this will make sense when we get to the other bits and pieces. The purpose of this paper is to inquire into, understand, explore. Again, you can look at these scripts in terms of your discussion. Right. Come on. And then a quantitative purpose statement. The purpose of this, whatever survey, is to. There are, and you'll see the independent and dependent variables there. I think some of these scripts are quite comprehensive, and it's not perfectly ideal for what we want to do. Then it is your rationale and relevance. So the rationale and relevance would be the justification for doing the research. So one way of looking at this is to ask the question, what would happen if I left this research alone? If the answer is nothing, then you don't have a reason to do the research. If the answer is that there will be significant consequences, you are starting to work towards the ideal rationale. So it is the justification, it is the notion of why this research is important, and it answers the question, what would happen if I left this research alone? So again, think of these kinds of options when you write your rationale and relevance. I get a little bit nervous when everyone is dead quiet that side. Is everyone okay? I get very nervous when I don't get feedback. From there, based on this, go Zama. Okay, we'll start with Zama.
Hi, Doc. Some people on the
Right?
group chat are having issues logging in. So I think that's why it's quiet because some of them can't see the slides, but some of us can, and some of them just can't join.
Oh my word. So
But
some
we
people
can,
can and cannot see the slides. What
yes.
the
And then,
heck is going on here? Okay, let me try
yeah.
and share it differently.
But
Doesn't
we
look
can
that good.
see it. So I don't know.
Oh my word. Okay, who can't see the slides and stuff? Guys, you've got to just interrupt me when this kind of thing happens. Go for it, Nosipho.
Hi, sir. Some of us can see, okay, we can all see the slides, but the problem is that the chat box is not working, so we can't type. When we do type, some messages
Yeah, I
disappear.
forgot
Some
about that.
can't
Yeah,
access the chat box entirely.
yeah, because we forced to set it up this way and not the way I did it for the. Maybe I'll just change the setup for next week. Guys, please remember, even if you can't type, please just interrupt me if I say something that's confusing. Okay, I will not take offense. You don't even have to put your hand up for that. Okay, so you'll see that there are two parts to this first submission. In the first part, you need to tell us your key theories. Okay. So this is the stuff that you'll deal with your supervisor. Thank you for that, Elisma. The first bit is to agree the theories that will form part of your research. We need at least one theory. In my mind, if you're doing a quantitative bit of research where you have two variables, I would have a theory that it relates to the first variable and a theory that relates to the second variable. This forms part of your theoretical framework. Okay. You can also just start sharing with us the kind of articles that you will be considering in your submission. Now, I don't know why this was included because there's a comprehensive literature review in part B, but just give us an idea of the theories that would form part or the theory that would form part of your theoretical framework. And I'll explain this in detail when we get to part B, as well as the kind of sources that you are using in your research. This is very early. It's going to change. It will be updated, but we just need to see whether you are starting to think in the right direction. You'll also give us some definitions. So don't worry about defining the concepts at this point. Just give us those key definitions that you'll unpack in your research later. Right. From there, we will look at examples of your qualitative research questions. For your qualitative research questions, the first rule is you will only ask what and how questions. You will never ask why questions. The moment you ask why questions, it implies that there is a relationship. So those of you that adopt an interpretivist paradigm, you will ask certain what and how questions. Okay. The way that it works, guys, is as follows. The first question that you ask will be the single broadest question you can ask about your particular research. And the way that it unpacks is as follows. So if you are doing qualitative research, hence the L there, you would have an overarching research question, the single broadest question you can ask about this particular topic, and then you will have clarifying sub-questions. So those sub-questions unpack in greater detail what is in your first question. So you have an overarching question, and you will have sub-questions that unpacks some of the detail that will not be included or will not be able to be captured in the broadest form of the question. Go, Lebohang. You don't need to put your hand up, guys. You can just interrupt me.
Okay. Hi, sir. So do we
Hi.
need a main and then like 4 sub questions?
I'm not saying four. You need sub questions. I think you should be able to get away with 3 sub questions. I don't think there'll be 4 sub questions. But what is important is that you have your overarching question and then you have your sub questions. Generally, it's 3. Just remember, the more sub questions you have, the more you would have to prove. Because these sub questions, okay, so these are your questions. Those sub questions translate into your objectives. So each sub-question becomes a research objective. So the more objectives you have, the more you have to prove. Okay, so your questions are those, and it really is a dog's breakfast at this point now. So those are your questions. And then from there, your objectives essentially are those sub-questions. The one thing in terms of this, most of you would have done exploratory research for qualitative. So you would say, let's say the question is, what is the process related to recruitment of high-end IT people? Here it would be to explore the process, to explore. So those essentially are the questions. And here you'll always start with to explore, to explore, to explore. Okay. if you're doing, and I'm spending a bit of time on this, if you're doing quantitative research, okay, quantitative research, you will have a single question, okay? Yeah, these are the objectives. So to explore will be the objectives, and they relate directly to those sub questions. So when I mark a paper, I look whether you've tied those together, because if you've not tied it together, it means you don't know what you're doing. Okay. In terms of quantitative research, you will have a single research question. What is the relationship between, and whatever the case may be? And then you'll have your hypotheses. Those of you that remembers third year research, you'll have your null hypothesis and you'll have your alternative hypothesis. Your alternative hypothesis suggests that there is a relationship. Your null hypothesis suggests that there is no relationship. Right, so in terms of qualitative research questions, the overarching question, and I'm going to reiterate this, the single broadest question you can ask about this particular topic, and then your sub-questions. Okay, those sub-questions become your research objectives. Okay, and I don't know whether we need objectives with this submission. Mohammed, you had your hand up there? Oh. Guys, and then if we look at qualitative research questions, you can see I've unpacked those a little bit further. We will, all of us, be doing phenomenological studies. So here is an example of a phenomenological research question. Okay. And then, yeah, go for it, bud.
So I just wanted to ask, in terms of the appendix, right? Can we fill the appendix in as is, or should we recreate it?
Well, I've not looked at the appendix. I don't know what's in the appendix. Can I do that as a voice note? Okay. I've not looked at the appendix, to be honest with you. Let me have a glance quickly. It's right here. So the appendix, where did you see the appendix, Boya?
Right at the bottom.
Oh, dear Lord. No, this is what you're using. You're recreating this. Okay, so this is what you'll populate. And I think it's limited to 4 pages. So in terms of your concept document, that is the template. Sorry, it's not an append. I don't know why it says appendix. This is your document template. So you can delete that, okay, and then just work from there. Okay, but this is for the first part, part A. But that is a valid question, Mohammed. Okay, so you have to populate this as your concept document. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, sir.
Thanks, bud. Okay. So if we look further, never why questions, because it's cause and effect. So in terms of quantitative research, a single research question, and then your hypotheses. So in terms of your hypotheses, you'll see that I've unpacked these further, and you can write from there. Don't use objectives. This is in extreme circumstances. Generally, the only time you'll see objectives in quantitative research is if you are doing quantitative research for a particular organization when you've been commissioned to do it for the organization. I've given you examples of what these scripts would look like. Okay. So your null and your alternative hypothesis. Remember HO, null hypothesis, H1, alternative hypothesis. Right. And then I've unpacked this a little bit further. Yeah, I think I've gone a little bit overboard with this. I've given enough information for you to work with. Okay. So from there, we need to look at our paradigms. In terms of the concept document, it is a broad discussion. We are limiting you to interpretivism and positivism. Please don't attempt to do critical realism. You will create a headache for yourself that's not worth having. So either choose interpretivism or positivism. At this stage, you've already done that, guys. Remember when we wrote the titles, when we did those workshops, this is where you had already decided whether it is interpretivist or positivist. Remember, interpretivism, qualitative research, quantitative research. I did give a bit of a description here. So you'll see from a positivist perspective, it's about causal relationships. From an interpretivist perspective, it is about those meaningful social interactions and experiences. So just a quick explanation of the difference between the two. If you imagine an accident scene, if you are the accident investigator and you interview the witnesses to get their point of view, their perceptions, their experiences of the accident, you're doing an interpretivist approach. The same accident investigator will be doing a positivist approach when they go and measure how long the skid marks were, what the reaction time was, etc. So positivism, stats and numbers. Here it's about feelings, perceptions, concerns, etc. Right. So this is very brief at this point. I think I would have used this example. If I say to you, what is water? What does water mean to you? If you're a positivist, you will tell me that it's H2O. If you're an interpretivist, for me, it is solitude, it is quiet, it's relaxation, it is time alone. I like the idea of being out in the ocean, deep by myself. Okay, I've given extra bits and pieces there just to tie things together. From there, we'll look at our research designs. So remember, if you have interpretivism, your research design will be qualitative. You cannot mess this up, guys, because it's that golden thread that I've mentioned a couple of times. If you are adopting a positivist approach in terms of your paradigm, your research design will be quantitative. Okay. And I've given an explanation of these, and you can unpack those further. So in terms of the research designs, generally, guys, you will, when you do quantitative, use surveys. If you're using qualitative, you will use phenomenology. And obviously, we'll discuss what phenomenology is. It is the fact that we investigate a phenomenon. There are other options, and I include the slide. You won't do any of these. Phenomenology is looking at a particular phenomenon and trying to understand that phenomenon better. Right. From there, we'll talk about the population, and I've tried to give a bit of a description of the population. You'll see there the total group of people who we need information from. It generally will be guided by your research problem. The fact that you have a characteristic that binds that population together, those would be your population parameters. And then also from there, we would have our target population and our accessible population, and you can unpack it from there. Now, we're not expecting things to be perfect in terms of the initial document, and a lot of this sorry, Elizabeth. So you can say qualitative, quantitative design. That's absolutely fine. So if we look at this, how much, just rather check how much this is. Right, let's have a look at how much it is in the submission. Population and sampling, 3 marks. Data collection, design, 5 marks. So you can just write interpretivism has to do with emotions, experiences, etc. Because I've adopted an interpretivist approach, I will be adopting a qualitative approach to the research and just give us 1 line to unpack that a little bit further. You can see how little it is. And also remember, we've got to fit all of these into this document and not go over 4 pages. Okay. So you'll see there that we have very little significant detail in this. Okay. But again, these are the kind of things you'll finalize with your supervisor. Okay. And from there, we will look at sampling. If you adopt a positivist approach and quantitative research, you will do probability sampling. Now, probability sampling means that every member of a population group that you've selected to be part of your research of the accessible population will have an equal opportunity of being selected. If you adopt an interpretivist approach, It means you'll be doing non-probability sampling, which means people don't have an equal opportunity to be selected to be part of the research. I generally ask my students, I'm not a big fan of convenience sampling. So my students, my supervision group, we generally will have purposive sampling where you purposively will approach a particular individual. And if you can't get enough people through purposive sampling, you would then adopt a snowball sampling approach where those individuals that you've purposively sampled would suggest other people you can interview for your research. Okay. In terms of data collection, if you're adopting a positivist approach, guys, remember you will use a survey design using a questionnaire. So survey design using a questionnaire. And again, you'll see that when we get closer to your research, we'll go and find existing scales, existing questionnaires that live on the internet. So in terms of that, from there, you'll do your data analysis. Your data analysis method, I've described it here, very basic. You don't have to give all the detail. I would just say data analysis step 1, 2, 3, and take it from there. If you adopt an interpretivist approach, you will use open-ended interviews. Generally, though, there are other bits you could have. You'll have field notes, personal notes, documents, but generally, the main focus and the main source of information would be open-ended interviews. I've unpacked it a little bit further, so you'll see that these slides will make a reappearance. So I've given a bit of extra information on each of these. From there, we look at our data analysis. Your data analysis for interpretivism, we will use qualitative content analysis, and in terms of the positivist people, you'll have some sort of statistical descriptive statistics going up to correlation. I've missed that in the slide. And from there, we have our ethical considerations. I've just given the 3 main areas of ethical consideration. As we go through this process, we'll unpack a heck of a lot more. Guys, and then our limitations. I've just given some of the limitations you might use, but it's a bit early to try and identify these. So in terms of your initial submission, in terms of this initial submission, there is essentially the stuff that you need to put in here, essentially. The part B, though, is where we need to spend a bit more time. So I'll stop here for part A, and I'm going to stop the recording, and then I'm going to start part B. So you'll see